On the 26th of July, 1973, a film opened in Hong Kong that would change action cinema permanently. Its star had been buried the week before. Bruce Lee died on the 20th of July, 1973. He was 32 years old. Enter the Dragon premiered 6 days later and reached American cinemas the following month. He never saw a single paying audience watch it. The film cost $850,000 to make. It has grossed somewhere in the region of $400 million. It sits in the American National Film Registry as a work of cultural significance, and half a century on there is still no serious argument about whether it belongs there. But here is the part almost nobody notices. Every single credited lead in Enter the Dragon is now dead. The people from that film who are still alive today are the ones whose names were nowhere near the poster: an uncredited guard, a stuntman in the opening fight, and a woman who was paid $100 for the scene that sets the whole plot in motion. This is what happened to all of them. He was born in a hospital in San Francisco in 1940 and raised in Hong Kong, where he was a child actor before he was anything else. By the time he was a teenager, he had appeared in around 20 films. The story of how he got to Enter the Dragon is a story of being turned down. American television could not work out what to do with him. He had been a supporting player, a fight choreographer, a teacher to actors who were more famous than he was. He pitched ideas that studios passed on and then made without him. American audiences had already seen him without knowing his name. He played Kato in The Green Hornet in the late 60s, and in Hong Kong that series was so popular it was simply called The Kato Show. But a co-starring part in a canceled superhero series is not a career, and when it ended, he went back to teaching martial arts to actors for a living. Enter the Dragon was the film where all of that stopped mattering. It was the first Chinese martial arts film financed by a major Hollywood studio, and he was not a supporting player in it. He was the reason it existed. Watch the Hall of Mirrors sequence at the end, and you are watching something that has been copied for 50 years in films that have nothing to do with martial arts at all. On the 20th of July, 1973, he collapsed at a colleague's apartment in Hong Kong after taking a painkiller for a headache. He did not wake up. The official finding was swelling of the brain, and a coroner recorded it as death by misadventure. The rumors started within days and have never stopped. Poison, a family curse, a stunt gone wrong months earlier. None of it has ever held up, and the sheer volume of it says more about what he meant to people than about how he died. He was 32. His son Brandon was 8 years old and would die on a film set himself 20 years later. John Saxon played Roper, the American gambler who turns up at the island tournament because he owes money to the wrong people. He was not a martial artist first and an actor second. He was born Carmine Orico in Brooklyn, was signed as a teenage contract player in the 50s, and had spent nearly 20 years working steadily before this film westerns, Italian pictures, television, whatever came. But he had trained in karate for years, seriously, and that is why the part fitted him. On set, he had the awkward job of being the recognizable American name in a film that everybody around him understood was Bruce Lee's. He never pretended otherwise, and he spoke about Lee with real admiration for the rest of his life. 11 years later, he took a part that gave him a second, entirely separate fame. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, he played Lieutenant Thompson, the police officer father who does not believe his daughter, and he came back for the sequels. A whole generation knows his face from that film and has no idea he was ever in a kung fu picture. What is easy to miss about Saxon is how good he is at the one thing the film needed from him. Roper has to be likable while being fundamentally unreliable, and the audience has to be unsure until the last act whether he will sell everybody out. That balance is not martial arts. That is 20 years of craft. He kept working into his 80s. John Saxon died in July 2020 of pneumonia. He was 83. Jim Kelly was not an actor who learned to fight. He was a fighter who got put on screen. He had been a middleweight karate champion in the United States and ran his own dojo in Los Angeles. The part of Williams had been cast with someone else, and when that fell through, the producers went looking. Kelly walked in, and within minutes, It was obvious. What he did with the role mattered beyond the film. In 1973, a Black American lead in a major international action picture who was competent, funny, and unafraid was not a small thing. Warner Brothers signed him to a 3-picture deal on the strength of it, and he spent the rest of the decade headlining martial arts films of his own. And then he stopped. By the early 80s, the parts had thinned out, and rather than take whatever was left, he walked away and became a professional tennis player and coach. He spent years on the United States senior circuit, teaching, competing, and largely ignoring the fact that he was a cult figure to millions of people. He was clear-eyed about why the offers dried up. He said more than once that Hollywood had been happy to have him for as long as the martial arts boom lasted and had very little idea what to do with him afterwards. He surfaced occasionally at conventions, where the queues were enormous and appeared to genuinely surprise him. Jim Kelly died on the 29th of June, 2013 of cancer. He was 67. The villain of Enter the Dragon was played by a man who had been making films since before most of the cast were born. Shih Kien was born in 1913 in Guangdong. He came up through Cantonese cinema and became the definitive on-screen bad guy of an entire industry. He played the villain opposite the folk hero Wong Fei-hung in dozens upon dozens of films, to the point where audiences in Hong Kong could not see him as anything else. By the time Warner Brothers came calling, he was 60 years old and, by his own account, semi-retired. There was one problem. Shih Kien did not speak English. He learned the shape of the dialogue and mouthed it, and every word Han says in the film was dubbed afterwards by the Chinese-American actor K. Luke, a man most Americans knew as Master Po from the television series Kung Fu. So the most quoted villain in martial arts cinema is 2 performances stitched together, and the face and the voice never met. He was also, by every account from the set, nothing like the man he played. Colleagues described a mild, courteous professional who had simply spent 40 years being paid to frighten people. Shih Kien kept acting into his 80s and became something close to a national treasure in Hong Kong. He died in June 2009. He was 96. Bob Wall played O'Hara, the bodyguard responsible for the death of Lee's sister, and he did not need to be taught how to move. He was an American karate champion who had trained and competed alongside Chuck Norris, and he had already appeared with Lee once before. In the fight between them, O'Hara smashes 2 bottles and comes at Lee with the jagged ends. Sugar glass was not available, so they used real bottles. Wall mistimed the thrust, and Lee's hand was badly cut. Production stopped while it was stitched. That accident became one of the most repeated stories in martial arts cinema, and it grew in the telling. The version that circulates online says the 2 men hated each other and that the fight was not choreographed at all. Wall spent decades denying it. They were friends, he said, and it was an accident on a set where the safety equipment simply did not exist yet. He kept working with Chuck Norris for years afterwards, in front of and behind the camera, and made a comfortable career in real estate on the side. Bob Wall died in January 2022. He was 82. If this film is one of the ones you grew up rewinding, tell me in the comments how old you were the first time you saw it. And if you want more of these, subscribing genuinely helps the channel. Ahna Capri played Tanya, the woman who arranges the guests on Han's Island. She was born in Budapest in 1944 and brought to the United States as a child, and she had been acting on American television since she was a teenager. Enter the Dragon was by far the most seen thing she ever did, and it did not lead where it should have. Her screen career largely faded through the late 70s. In August 2010, she was seriously injured in a car crash in Los Angeles and died of her injuries. She was 66. The entire plot of Enter the Dragon depends on one character, Lee's sister, who dies rather than be taken. She is on screen for a few minutes. She was played by a woman who, in Asia, was as big a star as anybody else in the film. Angela Mao trained in Peking opera from the age of 6 and moved into martial arts films in her late teens. Hong Kong marketed her as the female Bruce Lee, and she was billed as Lady Kung Fu. Lee saw her working on the set of a film called Hapkido and asked for a part to be written in for her originally 1 day of shooting, extended to 2 after he watched her fight. The figure that follows her around is that she was paid $100 for it. When a New York Times reporter finally tracked her down decades later and put it to her, she brushed it off. She cared about the quality of the film. She said, not the fee. And there is a detail in this that is almost too good. That same year, her own film, Hapkido, knocked Enter the Dragon off the top of the box office for a week. The sister outgrossed the brother. Quentin Tarantino has named her as an influence, and one of the most talked about sequences in Kill Bill closely echoes a fight of hers from a film called Broken Oath. She retired from film in 1983, the year her son was born, and moved to Queens, New York. For years, fans genuinely did not know whether she was alive. She was running Chinese restaurants, a subway ride from Manhattan, working the floor, telling nobody. The enormous man who breaks two of Han's own guards in the courtyard was born Yang Zhe in Guangdong in 1946. He was not a stuntman. He was Mr. Hong Kong, the territory's bodybuilding champion, and he held that title for 10 years. He began martial arts at 10 years old, and he was cast for exactly the reason you would expect. He and Lee became close. He has said in interviews that he was preparing to move to America in 1973 on the back of the film, and that when Lee died, the plans collapsed with him. He did not get there for another 17 years. When he did, a second career was waiting. In 1988, he played Chong Li opposite Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport, and for a whole generation of video shop children that not Enter the Dragon is where they first saw him. He has said that being known for one face has never bothered him. People come up to him for autographs because of Enter the Dragon, he once put it, and they do not really know who he is, and he made his peace with that a long time ago. He is 80 years old. He lives in the Los Angeles area. He has children and grandchildren, and he still trains. Of everyone billed in that film, he is one of only 2 people left. Watch the fight in the underground lair. Lee takes hold of a guard and breaks his neck, and the guard drops out of frame and out of the film. That guard is Jackie Chan. He was a stuntman then, 19 years old, one of a group of Peking Opera School graduates who did the dangerous work on Hong Kong sets for very little money. He also doubled for other performers in the film, including a rooftop climb. There is a story from that day that he has told many times. Lee swung a fighting stick and caught him in the face by accident. Lee stopped the take, apologized, stayed with him, and promised to put him in everything he made from then on. He died a few weeks later. It is worth sitting with that for a second. The most bankable action star of the following 3 decades is in this film for 4 seconds as a body. And Chan is not the only one. The man Lee fights in the opening demonstration before the film has properly started is Sammo, who would go on to direct and star in dozens of films and become one of the most influential action filmmakers alive. Yuen Biao was on the stunt crew too. 3 of the most important figures in the history of Hong Kong action cinema were on that set, and not one of them was billed. Bruce Lee, gone 6 days before it opened. John Saxon, 2020. Jim Kelly, 2013. Shih Kien, 2009. Bob Wall, 2022. Ahna Capri, 2010. Every name above the title is gone. What is left is Bolo Yeung, still lifting weights in Los Angeles at 80. Angela Mao, who was paid $100 and outgrossed the film a month later, running restaurants in Queens. And a teenage stuntman whose neck gets broken 40 minutes in, who became the most famous action star on Earth? Enter the Dragon was supposed to be the film that made Bruce Lee a global star. It did that. It just did it without him, and it made careers for 3 men whose names the credits never bothered to print.